Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about an issue that all of us are aware of. Many of us, if we're going to be honest about it, turn a blind eye to a lot of it. Homelessness. Take a look at these pictures out of California. The homeless problem on the West Coast is starting to get a lot of attention. Latest report from the Department of Housing and Urban Development found that there are roughly 500,000 homeless people across the country. Several cities in California, Washington, Oregon have seen an explosion in homelessness, prompting 10 city and county governments to declare states of emergency since 2015. Officials are blaming the region's booming economy, rent, and housing costs that are rising as some of the factors. Here in Arizona, we've got a problem too, and you've seen it out there, and it does seem to be getting worse. The question is why? Lisa Glow is the CEO of CAS, that is Central Arizona Shelter Services, a wonderful place that does incredible work in downtown Phoenix. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
That issue we've talked about the West Coast, but we have seen this here as well, right?
Absolutely, and I would say for some similar reasons too. We're seeing more people on the streets because of rising rental rates and housing costs. We have a real problem with affordable housing. There are other factors as well that are contributing to the rise in the numbers.
The numbers are going up, not in dispute.
The numbers who are unsheltered and on the streets are going up. It's hard to get an accurate count, but we clearly have a need for more emergency shelter, and we clearly have a need for more affordable housing. I think few people would argue with that.
Let's start with the premise that a lot of people say, well, these people are out there by choice. They want to be out there. What's your experience? My
experience is the contrary. So one of the biggest populations, for example, that we're seeing are the 55 and older population. They're more than 27% of the people we serve at CAS. And CAS, just so everyone knows, is the largest emergency shelter for adults in the state of Arizona. We have been for 33 years.
And it's not just a shelter.
Thank you. It's so much more. When people come to us, it's the first time they're coming off the street. We provide case management, support, helping them find a job. There are partners who work closely with us because we're on the Human Services campus downtown. So there's St. Joseph the Worker, there's food, there's clothing. But ultimately, our ultimate goal is to get them into housing and end their homelessness. It's the housing first model that people may have heard talked about. That's our priority. I
wanted to show you a piece that we did with you guys a few years ago. Allie Rasmus, who's now a reporter, she was a reporter with us, but is now a reporter in the Bay Area at KTVU in San Francisco. She did this story about a guy working homeless, living in the shelter at CAS. This will give you an idea of what happens. Take a look.
Jason Anderson wears a collared shirt and slacks to work, and after an 8-hour day at his desk job, this is what he comes home to.
There's no doors that close around. We have no privacy at all. That is something that people take for granted.
Home is a cubicle at the CAS homeless shelter. Without room 312, Anderson admits he'd be sleeping on the streets, even though he has a full-time job.
I made a lot of bad decisions when I was younger with my money. That was caused a lot of other things, but the hardest hit was my mom had cancer.
Anderson ran up the family bills flying out to visit his mom before she passed away. Then he lost his job, and before he knew it, Anderson, his wife, and their 3 kids were evicted.
It's embarrassing. I felt like I let a lot of people down, and I never ever want to have that feeling again.
His wife and kids moved in with a family member, and Anderson came to the shelter to save money and get back on his feet. Joy Cummings is Anderson's case manager at Central Arizona Shelter Services. And she says his story is becoming more common.
I had a client who had his master's degree, working on his doctorate. He was an economist. Because of a job falling through, he ended up here at the shelter.
Anderson is an Air Force veteran, and he never thought he would someday share a bedroom with 100 people. His advice to others, forget the homeless stereotypes, because he says they're changing.
You got to learn how to treat everybody as if it could be you. And some of these people are just a paycheck away from being there. You never know when that can happen.
For now, Anderson returns home to his family photos and makeshift rack of colored shirts, ready to wear another one to work tomorrow. Allie Rasmus, Fox 10 News.
Lisa Glow with Cass is with us. Mr. Anderson's story, is that atypical?
Very typical. He's a veteran. He was working, and he was probably one paycheck away. He lost a job, and he ended up homeless. That's a very typical story. Veterans, we serve 600 veterans every year, and there are more housing resources for veterans than perhaps for families and other areas because we've prioritized it, so we've made a lot of progress. There are also a lot of senior people. I was touching base on that a few minutes ago, that we're seeing. That number's going up.
The
number's going up. Our numbers went up last year. 55 and above is about 27% of our population, and we're serving nearly 6,000 a year.
What, for people who want to know kind of the breakdown, what would the percentage be of people who are out there by choice?
Well, it is a little bit hard to say, but I don't believe anyone is really out there by choice. They may tell you that because they've been homeless so long that that's how they identify, this is my home. And I've talked to people on the streets that's what they believe. So they may have lost a job and or had a medical illness and just never gotten back on their feet. It may be mental illness, substance use. Those are big challenges with a lot of the people that we serve.
For the amount of people on the street, are there enough beds to take them every night?
There are not, no. At Cass, we have 470 shelter beds. And that means they get their, what you saw here, the cubicle, or they get a bunk bed. The cubicles are far preferred. He had the top of the line.
That's a penthouse.
That's the penthouse.
Okay.
All of our vets stay in the penthouse.
Oh, you take care of the vets kind of at a different level.
Well, we give them, yeah, there are some special privileges for vets in a particular program funded by the VA that we've been very fortunate to have. But all of our clients there have the opportunity to be case managed. Many of them, youth, we see youth who have been chronically homeless, they get priority. The chronically homeless people have been homeless the longest length of time. With everyone, we're trying to resolve their homelessness quickly, so the average length of stay is under 30 days, but it's longer for some people.
Underlying causes, is it, I mean, I had always heard chronically mentally ill, substance abuse.
Those are definitely factors. I think poverty is a factor. I think one paycheck away, one illness away, and one of the disturbing trends that we're seeing, and I'm sure this is true of other shelters throughout the county and throughout the nation, with senior citizens getting taken advantage of. They are so much more vulnerable on the streets. We had an 89-year-old woman who came into the shelter with a walker. We found out her story. Her son had been taking her $1,700 a month pension. That was all her money.
And doing what with it?
We don't know. But what we did, because she felt compelled to sign it to him, we got her support. We got the public fiduciary, so her money's protected. There's a payee, and we set her up in an apartment, and she's doing great.
Wow.
It's not an uncommon story, though, for some of the seniors. And their medical vulnerabilities are tremendous for senior citizens as well. So one illness away from homelessness, one paycheck.
We talked about veterans. I want to show you this piece that talks as well about veterans in this situation.
The Cass Shelter in Phoenix is an emergency shelter that provides services for nearly 600 people daily, 365 days a year, many of whom are veterans.
Of that, we have about 100 per night on average in the shelter, and they range anywhere from, I believe the youngest veteran we had was 22, and the oldest veteran that I've had in the shelter with us that we've helped is 82 years old.
Veterans like Kenneth Trucks.
In the service, you fit in, you had a certain thing to do. That was your job. You come out of the service, it's like you don't know what you're doing because you don't know how you fit in.
Trucks served in the Army from 1984 to 1988. He was deployed to Korea. When he returned, he tried running his own business, but adjusting was tough.
All of a sudden, I think everything just fell through and I'm back here.
By here, he means homeless and sometimes helpless, and that's where programs like Cass or Central Arizona Shelter Services comes in.
We have partners that we work with, St. Joseph the Worker, Goodwill, other employers that come and they do job fairs and we send them there.
Cass offers a warm bed and a hot meal, but the services here offer a glimpse of promise as well.
For one, you have a mailing address and you have all the resources in one spot instead of traveling all over the city to try to get certain programs.
What the public can do is understand that every day we need to pay attention to the veterans who've served our country, especially the homeless veterans. That's an increasing population.
And by working together, the hope is to decrease that number and get our heroes home again. Anita Roman, Fox 10 News.
And you've got an update on Kent.
I do. Since that story aired, Kent has moved to Florida. He's bought a small boat and he's living the life. One of the things that had to happen with him, he had huge medical issues, heart issues, and he was with us for over a year. And he had also stayed at Cass 20 years ago.
No kidding. Second go around.
This is second go around. But he was like family there, but he needed to move on. So we helped him to get his Social Security benefits, and that's his income. And he's living the life in Florida.
He's retired.
He's retired.
He's served our country.
And he's served our country, and he is a happy guy.
Tell me about the people we're seeing on the street corner. Stoplights, freeway on-ramps and off-ramps with the sign, need help, needs. How much of this, because we've done some reporting on this, some of these people are not for real.
Yeah. And I can't answer, it's case by case, but I am aware that some of that does happen.
They're scamming people.
And they may be living in poverty and out, that's how they're getting their money. But I don't know if they are using it for drugs, what they might be using it for. And it's concerning. We have a campus where people can be served. Central Arizona Shelter Services is the shelter.
Yes.
And then at the Human Services campus, there are other services. So it's,
what other services do you provide? Just so people know, and let me start before you answer.
Yes.
How is CAS funded?
Yes. CAS is funded by the City of Phoenix, by the county, by the state. United Way is a major funder, and then we have to raise private donations.
Right.
So we have to make up the difference, significant percent through private fundraising, tax credit appeals, so that kind of thing.
I keep waiting to see one of these guys heading out on the street wearing one of my suits, because I give my suits to you guys.
Right.
Because when you are going for a job interview,
right,
you need to look the part, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I hope somebody's getting some benefit out of this.
Absolutely. Well, St. Joseph, yeah,
the
you
worker.
should see.
Yeah.
And it's a point of pride. We want people to have great clothing for when they go for their interview and to feel good. And so St. Joseph, the worker, it's a separate nonprofit on the campus, and they are experts in workforce and training and getting people jobs. There's also healthcare on the campus, Circle the City. And
right. I've got a piece about that coming up in the next segment.
They're phenomenal, and they're going to be putting respite beds down there. And when I say that, one of the reasons Sister Adele started Circle the City is because homeless individuals being released from hospitals were being dropped off at the campus, and they needed follow-up medical care. And that was 12 years ago she started it. So now she's going to be on the campus, which we're happy about. There's dental, there's food, there's mental health services. There are a lot of things in one place.
If somebody wants to contribute to CAS and help you in the fundraising that is a private fundraising, how could they do that?
Well, thank you for asking. We are a charitable tax credit agency. It used to be called the Working Poor Tax Credit. So you can donate up till April 17th. $400 if for individual, $800 if married, and you get it all back on your taxes.
All of it?
All of it. And you get to do a federal deduction. Of course, as a nonprofit, it is deductible. What you give in cash is deductible. And we have a website. If you would put that up, people can find us easily.
CASS.
Yes,
CAS. It'll pop up.
It will. And we appreciate all of that support. And in-kind donations, you talked about clothing for St. Joseph the Worker. We're doing a toilet paper drive right now. We look for things to be donated to cut down our expenses.
Your operating expenses.
And
as
in the
well.
summertime, we do a huge water drive.
We're going to talk about that. Is this a seasonal thing that we see in Arizona? More during the nice months here in January, February, March, and then people move on. We're going to talk about that with Lisa Glow, the CEO of CAS, Central Arizona Shelter Services. Back in a moment, talking about the homeless situation in the valley and across the state. Back on Newsmaker Sunday, talking to Lisa Glow, the CEO of CAS, which is Central Arizona Shelter Services. I would say really kind of the point of contact in the community for dealing with the homeless situation. Let me throw a couple of numbers at you, and I know this is always tricky. There was a count done in 2015, the last count I saw, 26,000 homeless in Maricopa County throughout the year. On one particular night, the count showed that there were 4,300 homeless in shelters and 1,200, almost 1,300 on the streets. Does that sound roughly correct?
It sounds roughly correct, and I know it's difficult to get accurate numbers. There are people who are homeless sleeping on someone's couch, and then they may be out on the streets, and if they're not out on that night, we don't count them. So I think we know on any night there's around 5,000 that are...
You know, the other one that I encountered when I've done stories on this are people living in cars.
Absolutely.
You get that a lot.
I saw some the other night. I was out with my staff and with people from the Human Services campus, and we were doing a count just around the campus downtown, and there were several people in their cars. And they were people who were working, but they couldn't afford a place. So the idea is to try to get them a voucher, but there's not enough housing or housing vouchers. And these are people who are working and can't afford the rest.
A housing voucher, what does that do? Does that give them the wherewithal to rent an apartment for a month, or what does it do?
Well, there's different variations. Rapid rehousing is a term that would get someone into an apartment and help support them for a year while they're getting stabilized. And those are people who have been most chronically homeless for a long time, and they need the extra support. A voucher may be time limited. There's very few, though, is the problem. There's not enough vouchers. We have waiting lists, and I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know this is a problem.
When that happens, though, let's say there is chronic mental illness, and once they're on their medication, they're perfectly functional. But if they're off their meds for a period of time, they're out there floating on the street, talking to people who aren't there, all of this kind of stuff. How do you deal with those issues?
Well, the city of Phoenix has the Phoenix Cares program they're currently funding. I know they did some outreach to the 3rd Street and Roosevelt group, and Community Bridges is a mental health agency, and they're doing outreach to get to folks.
Right.
I don't think there are enough people to get to people in need. I think it's a system that is underfunded, so that presents a challenge, but someone will be approached and then they're offered to come inside to a shelter or to get into a detox facility, and
you
people
can't compel them, though.
You can't.
That's a
Absolutely not.
problem. So if they're
Right.
suspicious or averse to having any kind of authority,
Right.
they may not work with you.
Right, and that's why CAS, an emergency shelter, is so important. We're called a low barrier shelter. People can come into our shelter if they are intoxicated or on drugs. They can't bring them in the shelter, and they can't bring weapons in the shelter. We check for contraband so everyone feels safe. But we are low barrier. We want them off the streets. We don't put conditions on them to get in there. So sometimes we're that first place, like that emergency room, before someone is ready to start resolving some of their issues.
You get them in there and then start to get them into services.
Exactly.
And address
Exactly.
the longer term problems.
Exactly.
Yeah, you mentioned Roosevelt Row. I want to show that story right now because this became a flashpoint in the community. This is tape number 7, I believe, Roosevelt homeless. This was Linda Williams' story. This was an issue that cropped up recently in downtown Phoenix, and it inflamed passions on both sides.
Residents who live in these apartments say it's been happening over the past couple of weeks now on a small island-like area in downtown Phoenix, surrounded by upscale new apartment buildings. Over a dozen homeless people are now camping out here.
We wish there was a better place for us to be. Unfortunately, anywhere else in Phoenix, every time we close our eyes, there's a cop there to wake us up and tell us that we can't be there, we can't go to sleep, we can't lay out a pallet in order to do so.
Monday, Phoenix police officers, who we're told check daily for people with warrants, arrested one of the men at the homeless encampment. Richard, who doesn't want to show his face, says he has lived here with what he calls his street family for about 2 weeks at 3rd and Roosevelt.
We are apologetic for being an eyesore for the community, but right now, this is our safe haven.
Gabriel Valencia also lives at 3rd and Roosevelt, but he's in an apartment that overlooks the growing encampment.
I've been here 7 months now, and it's an ongoing battle with them, and the last maybe month or so it's gotten worse.
Valencia says the noise coming from the encampment is bothersome. He says he also worries about the safety of his family. He wanted the downtown experience and pays about $2 grand for his 2-bedroom apartment.
I never did I think paying that amount of money. Of course, we would get, the 1 or 2 homelessness, that is expected, but to this extent, never did I think, and it's almost making me, wishing I didn't move down here now.
This is a balancing act right now, and that Roosevelt Row became a real, I think it was an eye-opener for people. Whose rights are we protecting here?
Right.
And that's a tough one.
Right. And I will say there are a lot of Roosevelt Rows all throughout Maricopa County. I live up near Sunny Slope, and there are people camping in the alleys all over the place. And in some communities, they actually know the homeless so well, they've built relationships, and they make it okay for the few people who live there.
When we start talking about sports arenas shutting down or trying to build new ones, malls, would anyone have the political will to say, we're going to turn one of those into a campus, an enclosed campus for the homeless? Shelter, services, everything. That's pretty much what you guys do, but you don't have really the space.
Right.
Could that be coming?
I think it could. And what everyone is talking about also is regional solutions. There are people that are concerned that it's in downtown Phoenix, but it allows us to provide so much in one place. So I think that we could easily shelter 1,000 in just downtown Phoenix. They're having problems in the East Valley and other places, and there are some other shelters. I think it could be coming. I think the political will 33 years ago, there were leaders in this community, former Mayor Terry Goddard and Jerry Colangelo and many others who said, we have to do something, and people acted and it happened. So I think it's time again for that kind of action.
How much can be done privately without government's help? Churches?
Churches already do so much. There are programs out there where they shelter people in the churches even. Family Promise is one I know of, and there's the U-Mom that shelters families. They're phenomenal, and they have a faith component. We also have a family shelter, I forgot to mention that, where we house 130 people nightly.
With families?
So we have, with families. So we have 470 downtown, 130 there. Then there's an overflow shelter at the campus.
Yeah, so there is help out there, just not quite enough.
And not enough housing for people to permanently go into.
Let's continue on that when I return with Lisa Glow, CAS CEO, talking about the issue of homelessness. Also, when we come back, what happens to these people seasonally? Does it change when the weather heats up in the valley?
Yes, sir.
Final moments with Lisa Glow, the CEO of CAS, Central Arizona Shelter Services. It's a great organization, downtown Phoenix. It's been around now 25, 30 years.
33 years.
33 years, yeah.
That's right.
Final moments. I've always heard that bus tickets are given to the homeless to get them out of town for Super Bowls or national championships. Is that really going on, do you believe?
I don't know if that's an urban myth or if it's really happening. I've heard the same thing. I've heard that it happens other times too when people want to get their homeless out of their community.
Right.
I have no way to verify that. It wouldn't be CAS. I don't think it would be government, so maybe there's private groups.
Where do you believe the public is on this issue right now? Are people growing intolerant of the homeless? Do you think there's people are getting sick of it? They're tired of it?
Frustrated and don't know what to do. I think there's a lot of frustration. I would love for people to understand it more in the face of homelessness, senior citizens, children aging out of foster care, veterans, and help destigmatize it and be part of the solution. There is a lot of fear out there, and a lot of that's not warranted. I'm not saying that it isn't at times. You have to be prudent and cautious. So they can come and tour the Human Services campus.
Walk a mile in my shoes, right. We've got 5 seconds. I just wanted to tell you thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming on the program, and we'd love to have you back.
Thank you, and thank you for your suits, too.
Yes. I know somebody's out there using them and hopefully getting the job. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker Sunday.